So, I was thinking, right, we're gonna be here for a while, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna dig this out. Yeah, stay with me here, okay? And then it's gonna go this way, but I'm gonna dig in, like, this way. And I'll dig all the way to the village over here, I think. None of them hate me. It would have been really awkward if that was me getting murdered. Gotta make sure they know that I am not to be harassed in my own domicile. Okay. They will learn. And they will fear me. They will be afraid of what I'll do. Look at that. Yes, we've made it. Hey. Don't open it. I think I looted all the chests here, though. Sometimes it's just nice, you know? To just mine. Don't have to talk. I mean, it's probably... Ooh, did I do that? It's probably horrible for, the viewers, but I mean... We're just kind of relaxing right now. I mean, there's not, like, a demon or whatever after me. I would know. I would know. And I haven't had any problems at all, whatsoever. It's not like I saw a... Take back my words. Alright. Oh my god, I'm gonna get... People are gonna be upset. They're gonna see my chests, and they're gonna be like, "How in the hell why does it look like that?" And I'm gonna be like, well, you know, I like it. It's my house. I like it. If I like it, and you don't, get out of my house then. I didn't invite any guests over anyways, so... Yeah, remember that, guys. That hallway's gonna be a problem. It's gonna be a big problem. What a lovely wooden floor! I say, as I have not finished it. Oh my god, I'm blind again. What is causing that? I can't see. I'm not exploring it under these conditions. I got lost last time. I do have a compass. Maybe it is worth it. No. That's what they want us to think. They want us to be risky. We'll go out there and we'll die. But maybe that's not so bad. You know, like, what if when you're dead forever in this world, you go and you become a guy, like Herobrine. Like, oh, I'm dead, now I'll haunt this world. You never know. You never know. Ooh. I win. God, I'm so good at this game. I honestly scare myself with how good I am. I'm thinking, episode 3, I'll do a bunch of exploration, see what the world's all about, maybe find some spruce. I would love spruce. I'm thinking when we find spruce, if we do, or dark oak, I'm gonna build a, I don't know, nice little house by the lake. Isn't that everyone's dream at the end? No. Stop it. Okay, let's cook that up. And then continue working on this. I don't plan on building anything too fancy long term. Because I mean, building isn't the focus of this. So, I'm kind of just gonna build a chill little house, explore, farm, stuff like that. So, I don't know. I hope everyone likes that. What if we did, I know, okay, this is really bad for, like, if you want to store a ton of, stuff in one spot. I just don't care. If I think it looks good in this one given moment, I'm gonna do it. Oh, now it's really quiet. I miss the rain. Probably should turn the sound of rain down. Who knows? Now, I'll be real, okay? I understand, I'm a new YouTuber and all that. I don't have a lot of people who know who I am or anything like that. Like, I understand that. Like, I feel like I should be like, hey, this is who I am, this is everything about me. Ugh. But I mean, like, at the end of the day, who I am doesn't matter in the scheme of things, right? I'm just playing Minecraft, and hopefully someone enjoys that, you know? At the end of the day, I'm just doing stuff, people may enjoy. It doesn't matter what I want at the end of the day. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I think I got my point across. What will we put down here? I don't know. But I think it will look pretty because I believe in us. Ooh, maybe I should put, what's it called? Torches. I should put torches and, like, jack-o'-lanterns. Everybody loves those. I'm gonna have to make, shears for that, aren't I?